In May of 2020, FreightWaves Live is headed back to the largest freight market in the Southeast, Atlanta, Georgia. Join FreightWaves for our best event yet, featuring captivating keynote speakers and rapid-fire demos of technology that is sure to take our industry to the next level. This is your opportunity to interact with some of the most innovative leaders as we mark a new decade in transportation. See you in Atlanta May 5th and 6th.
Hello and welcome to this Thursday edition of FreightWaves Now. I'm your host Anthony Smith and we have a full lineup for you today. We have Donny Gilbert coming back, talking to the brokers. We have Kevin Hill with the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index update, but first, a word from Zach Strickland with the carrier update brought to you by Powerfleet. Stay tuned.
Hey everyone, and welcome to your carrier update presented by Powerfleet. So, tender volumes throughout the country. We've recovered out of our troughing that we normally see with our 7-day moving average here with the outbound tender volume index. We've recovered about 1% ahead of schedule from last year. So this is a pretty good sign, but at the same time in December you see we had about a 5 to 6% deviation from the previous year, but that was to the positive side. We're about 1% up so far this year. So that's a pretty decent side, but we are losing some momentum as we pull throughout January. This isn't necessarily unexpected because a lot of the volumes in January last year were driven by a lot of that tariff freight pull forward, the West Coast volumes, etc. So, you know, LA, we talked about that yesterday. Los Angeles volumes are significantly down year over year as a lot of that freight has already entered the space and we're not seeing the same amount of activity on the maritime side versus last year. We're roughly about 16% down in terms of inbound maritime shipments year over year thus far. So let's check out the rest of the country and see what we're doing in terms of capacity throughout. So we've got our weighted rejection index map right behind me, combined with the outbound tender market share underneath it. So the taller the market, the more volume is present in that area. The redder the market, the looser the conditions are becoming in that market. The blue indicates tightening conditions. So up here around Detroit, we're starting to see some weekly tightness come up. We talked about the Louisville market yesterday. Along this little corridor right here, we're still seeing a little bit of intermittent tightness. But let's look at the rest of the country because I want to focus on, we've mentioned the Midwest and the Western Plain states over the last couple of days as being some of the tighter areas. Well, you look up here, here's the Omaha market. You don't really think about this area when you're a carrier because there's just not a lot of freight happening except for around very isolated areas throughout the plains. It's been consistently tight, and I'm going to talk about that here in a minute in terms of long-running trend lines. So, and also the Phoenix market, the nation's backhaul next to Miami, of course, starting to show a little bit of tightness. Now, it doesn't mean that there's going to be an explosion of spot rate activity. Rates aren't going to go through the roof in Phoenix all of a sudden, but it does mean that versus last week, we are getting a little bit tighter. So let's dive on into the Omaha market. Omaha, Nebraska. So last year at this time, we're looking at tender rejection rates pretty high, pretty elevated, but we've calmed down. We've come out of 2018. It's not as relevant as it was before. But if you look at the blue line here, tender rejection rates have been increasing steadily throughout the months of August through December. And that has increased roughly from about 8% tender rejection rate to 24% during that time period. So this is an increasingly tight area, so rates should be going up. There should be a little bit more load availability in these markets, and you see that green line also. So volumes are driving this side, this demand side. So Omaha is becoming a lot better market for carriers to enter over the last 6 months or so. So something to note moving forward, because Omaha, again, not necessarily the easiest market to operate out of. Let's look at the Phoenix market real quickly here. Phoenix, Arizona over here. All the rejection rates except for your local rejection rates are going up out of this market over the last several days. So especially the mid-haul. So your mid-haul is going to be stuff that's moving around the Los Angeles market into that area, Flagstaff, etc. You're going to want to make sure that you are covered going into those areas. So Phoenix, one of the nations, is the second largest backhaul market in the country, but it is becoming a little bit better market as we move into early 2020. So again, carriers, you can keep your rates a little bit higher coming out of the Phoenix market over the next couple of days. And that'll do it for today's carrier update.
The comprehensive logistics offerings from Powerfleet cover in-cab ELD, fleet management, trailer tracking, cargo monitoring, and tracking other assets such as chassis and intermodal containers. Power up your operations with Powerfleet.
Thank you, Zach, for that update. Today on our brokerage update, we're going to kind of dive in and look at what's going on in the reefer markets right now. It's the first quarter, and naturally, throughout the first quarter, we drop off from the holiday season, and our volumes and tender rejection rates always start to kind of dive down. So here right now in the reefer market, I first brought you our map. We're going to start looking at our outbound tender volumes with the reefer. Right now, as we look through our maps here, we see some hot spots running throughout the Midwest, and actually down here, even in Atlanta and in Lakeland, Florida, we see a lot of volumes that are moving out of these markets. Here, looking at their legend right now, as we look at our map, you see our volumes increase as the shades of blue get darker. So here in Ohio, Wisconsin, the Chicago area, these are areas that we're seeing higher tender or outbound tender volumes. Moving over in here, of course, we got the Omaha and Arkansas markets. Dallas, Texas has picked up a lot in the volumes. And on the West Coast here, we have Utah, the Salt Lake City, Idaho, and even the Spokane, Washington areas are picking up a lot with outbound reefer volumes, and California. But as the volumes increase, that necessarily mean that the actual rates increase. So let's kind of jump over and look at outbound tender rejection rates for the reefer market. Right now, we see, of course, here through the Idaho and Washington areas, and the Utah areas, these areas are picking up with tender rejection rates. It's kind of rare to see right now with what's going on in the first quarter. We always want to try to find these markets that had the higher tender rejection rates. And of course, on our sonar maps here, the areas with darker blues are areas that are carrying the higher tender rejection rates. And of course, during the first quarter, we have our natural freight that runs on reefers. Even though it's cold outside, we want these goods fresh, not frozen. But also we have a lot of freight now that's going on that actually protect from freeze. So a lot of your liquids, your colas, your power drinks, those need to be kept cold necessarily, but they also need to be kept not from freezing. So here, even utility stuff like paints, those need to be kept at a temperature that's above freezing. So right now is the time of year that reefer capacity can tighten up, but more or less due to the actual cold weather. So we need to watch those cold weather patterns, and those can be areas that you can jump into to jump in and find spot market freight through the reefer area. And a lot of it will happen out here through the Midwest as we've seen a lot of this weather coming through. This weekend we're going to see some snowstorms coming in up in the Pacific Northwest, coming into Washington and through this area. So these could be some areas that you look forward to. But one thing that we saw the volumes and we saw the outbound tender rejection rates for reefer. What I really love is our new 3D maps. When we layer this information together, what we're looking for here is we see, of course, in our 3D, we see the darker shades of blue, and we got some height here to our markets. So what you want to really look at is markets that have a darker shade of blue and some elevation to it. So here we have Arkansas and Memphis. They're dark shades of blue, and they got a little bit of volumes, but they're not, huge volumes. Down here in Lakeland, Florida, we see that it's a lighter shade of gray. So tender rejection rates are very low, but there's a lot of volume. So here, expect a lot of volumes, but lower spot market rates. Here they're picking up in the Northeast a little bit. Volumes are high, but of course it's a lighter shade, so the prices there aren't quite what we would want them to be. These are areas that you really just kind of want to get reefers out of, so you might actually turn the reefers off and run dry van freight just to get out of the markets. Over here on the West Coast though, Idaho, Washington, and Salt Lake City, we see here that we're getting a lot higher tender rejection rates along with volumes. So these are markets right now that you want to target. If you can jump in and find freight out of these markets, then sure, jump in, but you're going to have to elevate your bids because your carry rates are going to be elevated.
Voices from every corner of the supply chain concerning all modes of transportation. From the world's largest logistics podcast network, this is what the Freight Tech Revolution sounds like. Freightcast presented by FreightWaves. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm here with Kevin Hill. Kevin, what do you have for us today?
We have the DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index for this week, and we are after peak season.
Yes.
So we're hitting January. We're up to 45 last week. The last 2 weeks, we came up to 45, and we started down here at 15, and it gradually went up all through peak season, but now we're coming back down. And So as we go on this axis down to 0, the closer we get to 0, the more pricing power a shipper has.
Right.
The more we go to 100, the carriers have the power. So it's always a shipper's market in this peak season.
Right.
But we almost got to basically a balanced market, but it's the January blues now. And we'll probably trail off a little bit through this month and into February as well. We
Gotcha.
also, as you know, the ISM manufacturing index came out.
Right.
Down again, 47.2, so we're still in a little bit of a manufacturing industrial recessionary period in contraction.
Right.
So that's not good for either shippers or carriers.
Gotcha.
But certainly on the pricing index, it'll slant more toward shippers having more pricing power on goods. So until the warmer months come in, March, April, May, we'll probably be a little bit on the shipper side.
So one of the things that you mentioned
Right, here we go.
is
Sorry.
that it's going to be kind of coming down over for the upcoming 3 months, and that's really going to be more of a
upcoming 3 months.
shipper's market
Yeah.
for the. Okay.
So our latest freight intel report that we have up in Sonar, our carrier sentiment, Q1 2020 carrier sentiment index, we see, what are your expectations? And we ask carriers, what are your expectations for line haul rates in Q1 of 2020 as compared to Q1 of 2019? And we found that they really have no idea where it's going to go, right?
Okay.
It's about almost a three-way tie.
Right.
Everything's in the 30s. On load volumes, it was evenly split, 33%, up, down, sideways. And here, it's about the same thing. So prediction-wise, carriers don't know where pricing is going to go in Q1.
Okay.
But yeah, so it's probably going to be a rough Q1, and hopefully set us up for a good Q2 on through 2020.
Excellent. So it sounds like a lot of uncertainty right now coming out on both sides, and that seems like it's been a trend not just only in the freight industry, but more so in the greater economy as a whole. And
Exactly.
it seems like that first quarter is really going to be a lot of sitting around waiting and see what's going to happen.
It is. It's a lot of unknown, a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
As you know, following the market, housing is doing okay.
Yeah.
Oil's still depressed.
Right.
Even with all the geopolitical issues. So oil price is still, in the low 60s, can't get any volatility in there. And until we see something moving, with GDP or industrial production, it's going to be kind of a sit on the sidelines and wait and see.
Gotcha. And so that's one of the mainstays that we're going to see in the first half of, at least the first quarter of 2020. And as you mentioned, hoping to see a little bit more activity as we ramp up things in the warmer months, as you mentioned earlier, and definitely into the second half of 2020.
And hopefully we don't fall to 15 again on the shipper side, and maybe just bouncing in for the next few weeks.
Awesome. Well, Kevin, thank you so much for that update, and thank you so much for tuning in for this DHL Supply Chain Pricing Power Index update. And that's going to do it for this Thursday edition of FreightWaves Now. Thanks so much for tuning in. The content doesn't stop here. We're always posting on all of your favorite social media networks, so check us out there. And we recently just launched our FreightWaves TV app as well, and we're also available on all your favorite streaming networks, including Apple TV. So check us out there, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thanks so much for tuning in.
FreightWaves continues to follow the incredibly sad story of Indianapolis-based carrier Celadon Group abruptly shutting its doors, leaving 4,000 people without jobs weeks before Christmas. We here at FreightWaves want to help. FreightWaves has established a free job board for companies to post their openings and for people looking for employment in the freight industry to share their resumes. There's no cost for anyone to participate. Hundreds of jobs have already been added to the site since it went live on Monday. If you're looking for employment or have a job to post, head to freightwaves.careers.